Comics on the go, bro.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am Molecular Maurice, and welcome to the Unmasked Comic, where we got comics on the go, bro. Check this out, tribe. Picture this. 1930s noir detective mystery series. The dim light, the vintage typewriter, the trench coat, the hat, a detective getting down to the nitty gritty. This is what tonight's feature presentation is going to be. And without further ado, I'm going to roll right into it. And then you guys will feel what I'm talking about. The story begins with the narrator describing his dream of a woman covered in an overflowing veil. Although her features are soft, there is something slightly rotten about her. However, as he tries to define what he sees, the image transitions into a soldier from World War I. The image becomes more vivid as the soldier is among comrades engulfed in fumes of gas. The poisonous vapors penetrate through their gas masks and agony sets in. One by one, they die and descend to a web, stuck like flies, sticking into the dark corners of his mind. Unable to escape, this continuing horror panic sets in until he awakes, still shaken from the nightmare, which seems to be repetitive. The scene opens, and the 1930s was a time of great musicians and big jazz bands. To live in New York in that time was a world of excitement in nightclubs, especially in Harlem. This is where we see Diane Belmont, daughter of District Attorney Larry Belmont, gathering her things to meet her friends at one of these hot spots. Larry, in a fuss, doesn't understand why his daughter must go out every night. Larry feels the club scene is not a place for young ladies. He detests it, as he feels it is a magnet for undesirables. Larry follows Diane through the house, urging her to rethink it, even mentioning that she should start adulting. But Diane is set on living the nightlife. Her and her group want to live before they finally settle into the narrow scope that was available to women at that time. Diane hurries outside of her taxi, kissing her father on the cheek, and takes off in the night. Being a DA, Larry Belmont knows he can easily get the club raided. Making up his mind, he retreats to his study to make that call. But when Larry opens the door, there stands the Sandman in his study, going through the safe. Larry barely gets out asking him what his business is in his house before Sandman gasses him unconscious and escapes out the window. Friends, the Unmasked Comic proudly presents tonight's featured story, Sandman Mystery Theater, The Tarantula, Act 1. Diane arrives at the club just when her friends become curious of her whereabouts. Noticing she's the last to arrive, her friends point out that another one of her friends, Catherine, also just arrived. However, Catherine is very popular with the men, who swooned her as soon as she entered that club. Diane, admiring Catherine's magnetic charm, walks over to her table. Together they marvel at the famous musicians and gangsters of that time. Prohibition, 4 years in its repeal, has turned the city into a party central. Things couldn't be better as Diane and her friends live their best lives. The night continues well into dawn until Diane and Catherine call it quits and catch a cab together.
Taxi!
Their drunken conversation on a ride as Diane is surprised Catherine didn't go home with anyone. Catherine admits that there is someone she is dating, which is why she just flirted during at the club. Nonetheless, speaking in undertones, that suggests Catherine has a secret and she's in an interracial relationship. Diane and her crack jokes about being caught by their fathers. Catherine gets out of her stop and they say their farewells. As Catherine walks home, reflecting on the night, she reaches for her keys. Suddenly, she hears someone who grabs her from behind, covers her mouth, and abducts her away. The scene cuts to Diane being awakened, with her father knocking on the door. Larry teases Diane about her fun night and reminds her that they have an engagement at this gala that same evening, and she's supposed to meet him there at 8 p.m. No one is aware at the moment what happened to Catherine that same morning. 8 p.m. comes, and the gala proceeds as a man scans the room. A procurer, Wesley Dodds, dreads the company he is about to mingle with. Wesley had been back to New York for only a year. The great city he left was now a place of corruption, greed, and facade-living socialites. Wesley had to remind himself he gave his word, and he was there for the cause the event was promoting. In another part of the library, a conversation ensues with Larry Belmont and a retired Judge Schaefer, who swears the city would be a better place if he was still in the seat. Judge Schaefer's voice fades away as Larry is looking for Diane, hoping she did not stand him up. Before he finishes expressing his concern, Diane walks up behind him, acknowledging she kept her word to her father. Judge Schaefer compliments her beauty, adding other compliments that contradicted her father's opinion about her. Judge Schaefer excuses himself as the two are speaking and introduces them to someone approaching. Lo and behold, the man is Wesley Dodds, the same person that was dreading the event. Judge Thomas Schaefer was the person who invited Wesley. He was a great friend of Wesley's father before he passed away. Introductions are made, and Larry Belmont offers his condolences about Wesley's father. Another reason why Wesley returned to New York was to take over his father's business. Larry and Wesley speak briefly until the mayor takes the podium, introducing Joe DiMaggio. As everyone turns, diverting their attention to the stage, Wesley pulls out a notepad. Uninterested in Joe DiMaggio, he begins to write poetry and notices Diane has taken an interest in him, but he ignores her, true player style. This just entices Diane more, leading to her so she will glance over at Wesley's shoulder. Well, led up to her glancing over at Wesley's shoulder. He notices her peeping over, covering his notebook with his chest. Diane is embarrassed, but she is already committed and makes a remark about him not liking sports. Wesley confirms this, stating that sports are pointless and references a quote the Romans use. Diane finishes the quote as he starts it off. Wesley keeps his composure, unimpressed. He excuses himself and walks away while Diane glances and smiles. But her daydream doesn't last long, as she overhears Detective O'Donnell speaking to her father. Larry is whose evening is now interrupted by O'Donnell, urges him to tell him what the matter is. The detective whispers in Larry's ear as his eyes light up in astonishment. Just in time for Judge Schaefer to hear him mention about early this morning in a note that showed up an hour prior. People begin to leave the event, and Wesley Dodds is now outside when Judge Schaefer walks up. In a way, he pities him because he remembers what his father told him about him caring too much. The way Wesley draws him up is that he's a person of delusional absolutes. When Schaefer finally approaches Wesley, he offers him a ride home with his driver. During the ride, the judge commends Wesley on keeping his father's business afloat. In that, he mentions that everyone is not that responsible. Going into telling Wesley he overheard Larry Belmont and Detective O'Donnell's conversation. He listens intently when the judge tells him that there has been a kidnapper for some time. Law enforcement have been aware about a kidnapper by the name of the Tarantula, further explaining during recent crimes, felons had been found unconscious at the crime scene. It is strange, but the two seem connected in some way, apparently. They reach Judge Schaefer's stop, who remembers he is not on the seat anymore. Wesley offers some comforting advice of not holding the world on his shoulders, and they say goodnight. Meanwhile, Wesley pulls up to his mansion, thinking about the many holdings his father was successful in. He realizes that his business ventures and success protected him from thinking about things like the war. It saddens Wesley because the nightmares of such things are inescapable. Then turning to a voodoo-looking Sandman doll tucked in a bed in a separate room. Weird. If this isn't some foreshadowing weirdness, then I don't know what is. At the Belmont home, Diane is rambling about how the night went, being glad her father urged her to come. Her rambling continues about how interesting she found Wesley Dodds to be, blah, blah, blah. Amid her speaking, Larry Belmont becomes nervous, knowing he must tell Diane something. When he finally gets her attention, he broke the news to her that Catherine Vandermeer was kidnapped. This confuses and shocks Diane, of course, because they just saw each other early that morning. Larry is telling his daughter Catherine did not make it home, and her family, the Vandermeers, received a ransom note that evening. Diane, in shock, anger, and hurt, pushes her father for more information. Unfortunately, his knowledge is limited about the kidnapping, but they know that he wants money, and the Vandermeers did not want it public to avoid widespread panic, leaving Diane with more questions, confusion, and pain. In a laboratory, the Sandman finishes a concoction of liquid to gas on his Bunsen burner, thus providing the reader an insight of the Sandman having knowledge of chemistry, step by step carefully assembling the canister to the gun. The story convenes to the home of Albert Goldman, who is introduced to Lenny Green and Moses Vernon. These two gentlemen took a flight and just arrived at his home. They have small talk about inconveniences of the world, first world problems. Albert puts his arm around Moses, foreshadowing they have a private matter to discuss. But before they walk away, something weird happens. A woman calls for Albert while addressing him as darling, and he introduces her as his daughter, Celia. She's dressed up for an evening out, which makes Albert uncomfortable and suspicious. The whole moment is awkward for the five of them, but it is brief when Celia finally excuses herself and she leaves. The men continue forward and retreat to Albert Goldman's study, but when he turns the light on, his son Roger is just sitting there in the dark. Taking Albert off guard, he scolds him for drinking in the dark and being a weirdo. Albert, embarrassed, of course, urges Roger to leave the room and makes an excuse for his waywardness. Within a short span of time, we see Goldmans have 2 adult children at home, at last getting to the reason for the visit. Albert Goldman wants to anonymously finance multiple productions for Moses Brennan's studio, fading us to the Sandman witnessing the meet and greet, staking the gentleman out through the study's window. A deal is conspired, and Albert sees his new associates out when his drunk wife stumbles downstairs, hiccuping and wondering why she was unaware of the guests. Albert doesn't even bother to introduce her because he's embarrassed for the 3rd time in a row. First it was his daughter, then it was his son, now it's his wife. Moses saves him further grief, politely telling Albert's wife they were just leaving. They walk to their car, and Lenny Green, he gets enraged, calling his driver an a-hole for not picking the party up at the door like they weren't there to get them, like they were instructed. Moses is upset, screaming to the others that all the drivers are asleep. Across town at the Belmont brownstone, Diane is attempting to leave for the night. However, Larry blocks the door, not wanting her to leave because of the current kidnappings. Diane pleads her case, 1, as an adult, 2, she needs to be among friends to cope with Catherine. She goes about the kidnapper having his victim already, but her father stops her. Larry reveals to Diane that he thinks the perpetrator was in their home. The Belmonts are under surveillance for their protection. Diane is shocked that her father kept that from her, then suddenly the doorbell rings. Wesley Dodds is on the other side, apologizing if it was a bad time, but proclaiming he decided to take Larry up on his invite to the house. His timing could not have been better. Larry invites him in, and Diane changes her mind for a nice evening at home. They retreat to the parlor room, and Larry asks Wesley if he wants a drink. He declines it to the surprise of Diane. But it is another odd thing that attracts her to Wesley. Larry goes on to say he doesn't promote drinking that much, but it is legal, so he indulges now and again. Wesley finds it amusing, and he makes a sarcastic comment about prior bootleggers being unemployed now. The bootlegger he was referring to was Albert Goldman, the man with the weird family that we just talked about. Wesley's familiar with him because his father dealt with them also. However, to be fair, he expresses that Goldman is a legit businessman now. The door buzzes once again, and then Larry leaves to answer, which left Wesley and Diane to themselves. He asks Diane how she spends her Manhattan days and nights. She responds that his days are more filled than hers with his business. Wesley confesses he does it out of obligation more than passion, at the same time catching Diane's attention as he performs or does this origami art with a piece of paper he took out of his pocket. But Diane can elaborate on how interesting it seems. Larry comes back with bad news. Wesley feels he should leave so Larry and Diane can speak alone. Diane, filled with anxiety at this point, wants to know if it was a lead on Catherine. Unfortunately, it was related to her, but only because the same kidnapper abducted someone else. While the conversation plays out, we see an origami spider left on the table. Back home, Wesley reflects how his dad used to say death was unavoidable, but protection can be bought. He is saddening how his father was delusional, thinking his money kept him from tragedy. Judge Schaefer then stops by, telling him about the latest kidnapping. He asks Wesley if he wants to go with him to the precinct, but he yawns and declines. However, encourages the judge to keep him informed because of his interest in the case. This did not sit well with the judge, as he made a remark of the victims' families being interested too. Outside in the alleyway of a restaurant, a kitchen worker throws away the trash, and he's complaining while he's doing it. When he empties the garbage in the dumpster, blood drips down on the garbage can. He looks up to see a woman ripped up, naked, and bleeding, hanging from the fire escape like a puppet. The woman resembles Catherine Vandermeer. Leaving the man screaming in frightening shock, he runs away. Judge Schaefer arrives to the precinct to see a mob of reporters being barricaded by the police. He sees Diane, who informs him her father is speaking with the feds. The judge notices the inappropriate eye contact Diane is receiving from the men in uniform. Diane waves it off with the boys will be boys attitude when one of them bumps into her, spilling coffee. He insists on helping her, but she refuses and goes into the bathroom to clean up. But right before she goes in, she looks back at the same cop and the judge talking, which in a way is making her wonder if he purposely did that to make Diane leave. Anyway, she enters the ladies' room to flick the lights, but they are out. Grabbing her flashlight, she scurries to the sink, only to be startled by Sandman, sitting in the shadows with his hand in the trigger well of his gas gun. They both startle each other, now facing in the same direction, with both of them contemplating their next move. Ladies and gentlemen, that concluded Act 1 of Sandman Mystery Theater's The Tarantula. Please let me know your thoughts. Give us a thumbs up and click on the subscribe button. Don't forget to leave your question and comments. Thank you for joining us. But before I go, I would like to say one reason why I like Sandman Mystery Theater is because its uniqueness. I already spoke about how it takes place in the 1930s, and as you read these, they don't hold back. There is sensitive material in these. There's racism. There's like all kinds of other stuff. It only gets better from here. He seems to be a vigilante, but at the same time, he seems kind of suspect. Like, why did he leave that tarantula folded origami on the table? What was he trying to say about that? You could tell he's playing a double agent when he's talking to the judge, when he's talking to Diane's father. So I guess as Wesley Dodds, he's covertly getting information in his natural legal persona. And then as Sandman, he goes and investigates other things. One thing I like about him, you got a person like Batman, right? Batman, he looks legit. He looks like he can do damage. To me, Wesley Dodds don't look like that. He doesn't look like somebody that you should be intimidated of. He doesn't look like somebody that's scary, but he's got these methods that just seem to work. And the issues get better and better as we go along. However, with that being said, please let me know your thoughts. Give us a thumbs up and click on that subscribe button. And don't forget to leave questions and comments at your will. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate your time, and we'll see you in Act 2 on the Unmasked comic presenting Sandman Mystery Theater. I'll see you soon, people.
Yeah, baby. Comics on the go, bro.